Hey everyone, welcome into the KSL Stream Center. I'm Shara Park. Thanks for being here. We've already got some people joining us on Facebook and YouTube. So glad you could be here. We are excited to talk about a thrilling new podcast that is coming to KSL Podcast called Uinta Triangle. And I am thrilled to have with us a host of that podcast, Dave Cawley, joining us right now in the KSL Stream Center. Dave, thanks for being here. This is an exciting day for you because this drops today. The first two episodes already out right now, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
That is correct.
1 and 2 of Uinta Triangle are out in the wild.
Out in the wild. And this is in the wild.
That's right. This is a story that takes place in the mountains, and we've done everything we could to take the listener of this podcast to some pretty amazing places. I'm sure we'll talk about all of that here in the next couple minutes.
Yes, and this is the thing. Okay, many people know you from your wildly popular Cold podcast. But Dave, this is taking us on a completely different journey. Most people know you from true crime. This is not along the lines of true crime, but it is a mystery.
It is.
And walk us through what this podcast is, because I'm going to let people in. I've already listened to the first 2 episodes, and it does still have that intrigue and that adventure and that mystery. It kind of has everything that you would expect from Cold, but in such a unique way, a different way.
So anybody that's listened to Cold, obviously our 3 seasons detailing missing persons cases, all of those homicides or suspected homicides, right? Susan Powell, Joyce Yost, Cherie Warren. If you've listened to me tell those stories, you probably get a sense that I am fascinated by this idea of somebody going missing and not being found, right? That's a common element among all 3 seasons of Cold. Uinta Triangle has that same type of mystery. We have the man at the center of this story, Eric Robinson, a hiker from Australia who went on a long walk. He went out by himself, and he didn't make it to the end of the trail. So I connected with that story as it was happening because I was working as a reporter and became aware of it. And I have just continued to follow it over the years. I am also a hiker. So for me, it was a story that really hit close to home, and it touched on a lot of these, I guess, conversations that I've had in my own life, right? About why do you go out and hike? Why do you do it alone? Shara, you and I have had a conversation about this already in depth for a bonus episode of the podcast. And I think there's something there for especially people here in Utah who love our outdoor spaces, love to get out and hike. They will recognize some of those, I think, issues and tensions, right, that we deal with when we go out into wild places. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get into that part of it a little bit later, that connection to nature, that connection you have, because that does play a part in this. But first, walk me through Eric's story. Okay, so 2011, this was a time where perhaps Eric's story maybe got not as much attention because we had another story that really took the spotlight at that time. So tell me about Eric's story.
All right.
Who was Eric?
Yeah, Eric Robinson, in 2011, he's 64 years old. He was born in England, raised in Scotland, and then spent most of his life in Australia. He experienced a number of losses early in his life. So he lost his father when he was just 1.5 years old. He never knew his dad. His mother died young. He was married, and his first wife also died young. And these losses really came to define him. And what I learned researching his life is that Eric dealt with a lot of that grief and trauma by going out into nature. He went on long walks. And his aspirations continued to build year after year as he was going to Patagonia, he was going to Nepal, he came to California to hike the John Muir Trail. And then in 2011, he sets his sights on the Uinta Highline Trail, right? Our own backyard in the Uinta Mountains. He wants to hike this alone, so he comes here, he's got a plan, and he starts the trail at the end of July, and then he doesn't come out the far end. As you kind of hinted at, for those of us in the news business here in Salt Lake, August of 2011, there was a big deal going on. It was called the Susan Powell case. Stuff was happening up in Washington. So in many ways, I think Eric's disappearance got a little overlooked at the time. And what happened from 2011 till now, I don't want to give too much away in the story, but there's a lot of human drama, especially with Eric's wife, Marilyn, and her experience joining the search, trying to figure out what had happened to Eric.
Okay. It's interesting. I'm looking at some of these images here. The Uinta Highline Trail, one of those most beautiful spots in our state. And here you are retracing these steps. First of all, Dave Cawley, you're out there by yourself doing this. Is that safe?
That was a fun conversation to have with my boss and other folks here at KSL. Hey, here's this story of a man who disappeared on this trail while he was hiking alone. I think the only way to tell the story right is for me to go out and do the same thing.
Not just here, but you went to New Zealand? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
By yourself?
Yes, that is something that I did. Look, I'm not a person who's going to stand up and say, never hike alone, that's unsafe. There are people who feel that way. In fact, Eric's best friend, I interviewed him in Australia, and one of the things he told me is that it's reckless for anybody to go out and hike alone. I'm not going to say that, but there are risks that are inherent to traveling through the mountains, and being alone certainly escalates those risks. So Eric was a guy we know focused on safety, and I tried to take that same mindset going out, going to carry an emergency beacon, going to leave a detailed plan with people where I'm going to be, and if I don't show up by this time, we know something's gone wrong. I felt a little anxiety that, something bad could happen to me, and if people want to hear what happens, I guess they got to listen to the podcast.
Wow, Dave. I mean, I understand. I hike. Many of us here in Utah, this is why we live here. We understand, we connect with nature, we love to be out there, we feel a draw to it as well. So we understand the need to get out there and to do this and to be on these hikes. We understand, right? We kind of get that.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to play a story that aired on KSL 5 News last night at 10 o'clock to kind of set up the fact that this podcast was dropping here today. So give me a little, just an idea of what we're going to see here, and we'll set the story up and play this for those of you who are watching. We've got a lot of viewers who are joining us right now on Facebook. By the way, I want to reach out to those of you who are watching. If you've got questions for Dave, right now you can put them in our chat. I will ask those questions for you. This is your opportunity. Again, this is a brand new podcast that is dropping today. Those of you who know Dave know that Cold is wildly successful. This is a new podcast, very different than what we've seen from the Cold version of things, but this is very similar along the lines in terms of mystery, right? So if you've got a question for Dave, put it in the chat. We'll ask him. But Dave, set us up. What are we going to see here in this story?
Okay, so one of the key focuses of this first story was explaining the idea of what is the Uinta Triangle, right? If you've heard of the Bermuda Triangle, a place where, ships disappear for reasons that are mysterious. Through my career reporting on missing people in the Uinta Mountains, I came to this idea of most of the hikers that go to the Uintas, they come out without any trouble, but there are those handful that disappear for reasons we don't understand. And that was the origin of the idea Uinta Triangle. We touch on some of those cases here in the first story.
Okay, here's that story.
This is the top of the world.
Towering peaks.
The ridgeline is imposing.
Sparkling lakes.
The escarpments, the drops, the meadows.
Tranquility treasured by tourists from around the world.
It's a magical place.
But behind this beauty, Utah's Uinta Mountains have a reputation.
This country up here is some of the most rugged in the continental United States.
Rugged, remote, vast.
It's an enormous area. It's almost unfathomable to think how large it is.
Thousands of acres, hundreds of miles of trails, and a million places to go missing.
Search for a missing man in the Uinta Mountains.
Intensified the search for a hunter.
Rescue teams from 6 counties are now involved.
Search continues in Summit County for a hiker missing near Kings Peak.
From hikers to hunters, Boy Scouts to backpackers, a minor misstep or miscalculation in the Uinta Mountains can trigger an all-out mystery.
There's no trace, no one's finding any trace.
They would have found him by now.
Everybody, please just pray for this boy.
In 2004, 12-year-old Garrett Bardsley disappeared while camping with a church group.
It's frightening, it really is. Being lost out here at 12 years old, I can imagine.
After 10 days of searching, authorities believe they have tried to do everything they could to find Garrett.
Organized searches for Bardsley went on for weeks with no success.
We haven't found him.
We just don't want to leave him up on the mountain. We want to bring him home.
This trail should have been fairly routine for Melvin Heaps.
In 2017, a 74-year-old hiker vanished on a simple day hike near Crystal Lake.
There's lots of trails that go to several different lakes in that immediate area. That gives us a lot of different challenges.
Despite days of searching, no one ever found any sign of Heaps.
I'm no stranger to the high Uintas. I've spent my whole life seeking solitude here. And this idea of a Uinta Triangle is always in the back of my mind when I visit these mountains. But of all the Uinta missing, there's one case I just can't wrap my head around.
64-year-old Eric Robinson came all the way from Australia to hike the Uintas.
Robinson was due back off the Highline Trail about 8 days ago. His wife says he's more than capable of handling it on his own.
He's a well-organised person who plans meticulously and is always on time, even early.
Eric Robinson spent months planning, mapping his route and taking every precaution. He set off from Chipeta Lake in July of 2011. The search started when he failed to arrive at the far end of the trail.
It's a bit hard to remain positive after 4 days and knowing the kind of person that he is.
The Uintas can swallow a person who is unprepared, but that wasn't Eric. He had extensive experience. So what could have led him astray here? Well, to answer that question, we have to leave the Uintas and head halfway around the world. Eric's wife, Marilyn, helped me retrace his steps from Australia to New Zealand and beyond. I learned Eric had had missteps in the mountains before.
He got slammed by bad weather
and even experienced tragedy.
Alan's death deeply rattled Eric.
But it didn't stop his wanting to walk the world's greatest trails.
His mantra was, I'm going to do as many walks as I can for as long as I can carry a backpack, because there's more walks than I can achieve in a lifetime out there.
The beauty of Utah's mountains brought him here.
Magnificent scenery, peace, tranquility of the nature.
Never knowing this trail,
and I understood why he wanted to walk through there,
would lead him right into the Uinta Triangle.
The longer that time went on, the missing person can be missing forever.
Oh my goodness. Wow. This is powerful. Okay. So this really took you around the world.
It did. Yeah. Wow. I was going back to when this idea for this podcast first came around, and I went to my boss and explained, hey, look, to do this story right, I need to go to Australia because Eric is an Australian. The people who knew him and loved him are in Australia. The only way to really report the story right is to go there and meet them in person. I will say, thankfully, we both work for a company that understood the necessity for that. And after I had kind of crossed that bridge, I took it one step farther and said, look, there's an important event in this story. Eric was overdue on a hike in New Zealand. I need to understand what he experienced there and how that shaped him before he came to Utah. So I'm also going to go to New Zealand. And I think there was some, maybe nobody said it out loud, but maybe a thought of, Dave's just trying to get a free vacation to New Zealand to go hike with this podcast. But it, I believe, was really important to do the job of going to these places, meeting the people in person, getting to know Eric, so that we can accurately represent where his mindset was when he set off on the Uinta Highline.
Yeah. After listening to the first 2 episodes, I didn't feel that way though. Because I felt like I needed to know who this man was.
Good.
This to me is a podcast. And again, I've only listened to the first 2 episodes, is about connection. It's about understanding. It's about a community. I felt, Dave, like I now know you better. I've listened to your seasons of Cold, and of course these are stories about people who these crimes have taken place, and these are members of our community. But then you have a host, right, who hosts these podcasts, and I've gotten to know you, but I've gotten to know you better through this podcast and who you are, and I feel like we get a little piece of you in this podcast as well. And I would like for you to maybe, if you don't mind, talk about that a little bit, because my question to you when you first did this podcast was, who goes out and hikes like this?
Right.
You do, Dave.
I love the outdoors, and I've had people ask me often since Cold came out, how do you deal with all of the nasty, awful things that you cover in these stories? And the answer for a long time has been, well, I go out in nature, I go out and hike, and especially getting out by myself, I like that experience of being alone. And I know that not everybody gets that, or that some people look at that and see it as too dangerous or whatever. And so learning about Eric, I felt like I understood him.
Yeah.
What drove him to get out there. And it felt like for somebody to tell his story, they needed to connect with him. How do I convey that to somebody who's listening? You and I, Shara, in our day-to-day coverage of news, we are trained to keep that arm's length distance, both from the people we're reporting to, but also the people that we're covering. And this podcast format and this story specifically, I just really felt needed a bit more transparency on my part. And so you know,
why it mattered to you.
Yeah, in the first episode, I get a little more personal than you would ever see on the 10 o'clock news, talking about the experiences in my life that led me to be the way I am and how that helps me connect with Eric.
I love that you did. Dave, I love that you did. I love that you gave a little bit of your personal self to this story, because as journalists, we keep an arm's length on most of our stories. And in this one, you feel a little bit more connected to it. And I appreciate that you did. I think it lends to the why you chose this case as your next project. Yeah. Maybe you can speak on that a little bit more. This stuck with you.
I sure can. So the popularity of Cold has been a wonderful thing because it's allowed myself and KSL to invest far more time covering, Susan Powell, Joyce Yo, Cherie Warren, some of these other cases than we typically get on, news of the day style coverage. The flip side to that is there are more cases of missing people or, unfortunately murdered women than I, in a lifetime, could cover. And we often get questions from people about, can you cover this case? Can you cover my story? And my heart breaks because I want to help everyone that I can.
Yeah.
And we are such a small team. This is not Cold Season 4. We are publishing Uinta Triangle in the Cold feed so that the Cold audience can listen to it. It's also on its own feed, so I'm hoping that people will connect with it there. But it's important to me that we recognize when someone disappears in our community, in Utah, for the local person watching or listening, it doesn't matter where they're from. Eric's from Australia. A lot of folks might say, well, why are we covering, an Australian man's story on the news in Utah? Well, it's because his disappearance affected our community. It affected me, and the relationship that I have developed with Eric's wife, Marilyn, and other family members and friends over the years it's unique in my experience reporting the news, covering the news, and I think there is something just deeply human about what all of these people went through, and that somebody listening to the story can take something meaningful away from it, I hope.
Yeah, I think so too. Dave, okay, give me a little bit of a breakdown here. We are getting some comments, some of the characters. First of all, Darlene left a great comment here on Facebook. She said, Dave, thank you for what you do. Crystal, her question was, did his wife get any closure? I think you're going to answer that in the podcast here, so I don't want you to give it away.
Sure.
But the characters in this podcast, we've got Darlene, his wonderful wife, who just opened up her world to you. We've got Alan, who is a best friend, who you talk about in this podcast. Who are some of the other characters we're going to hear about in this podcast? When I say characters, I mean real life people. Friends, family.
So in telling a story like this that spans such a large geographic area and, someone's lifetime, there clearly are many, many people that we could talk to. For the podcast, I really tried to narrow it in on a few kind of focal characters, you would say. So we do hear from Eric's wife primarily. He developed a good friendship with a woman here in Utah named Julia Geisler. She is a primary focus character for us. You mentioned Alan. So Alan Beck was Eric's good trekking buddy, and they had a bit of a falling out in the years prior to Eric coming to Utah, and that became a really important kind of dynamic to explore in the first couple of episodes. As the story plays on, we are going to hear from Eric's wife Marilyn's daughter, Rachel Marsden, and her husband Jeremy, because that allows us to see not only what's happening here in Utah while the search for Eric is rolling out, but also what the family in Australia are going through as that's happening. And then, without giving too much away, later in the run of the podcast series, so in a few weeks, we're going to get to know a family from Colville and the role that they played in this story. And I think it's going to surprise and hopefully touch a lot of people to see this just international connection that's made between Eric's family and I guess you'd say, a random family here in Utah.
Well, speaking of international, we have somebody who is watching on YouTube. They say, I am from Australia, asking what this podcast is about. Saul, I'll tell you right now, this is about a man from Australia who comes to Utah and disappears on what is called the Highline Trail here in Utah, a trail that perhaps not a lot of people know about, but one of the most beautiful trails here in Utah that experienced hikers know about. But you need to be an experienced hiker if you're going to go hike this trail, right, Dave? I mean, we're going to see some images here. You talked about the beauty of this trail and how we almost don't want people to know about it because it is so gorgeous.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, I don't want to give away this special place. The Uintas, to me, are very special. They're a place that I have spent my whole life exploring, and there are many more, nooks and crannies in the Uintas that I would like to see, but they are also fragile. They are high elevation alpine terrain in many places, and the more people or livestock that we put into these places, the more ecological damage that's done. So there are some themes that run through this podcast talking about that. And Eric's experience, right, as he walked through this space. As I go forward in episodes 3, 4, 5, you're going to hear kind of a firsthand account of my walk through this space and relating it to what Eric may have experienced on his walk. And my hope is that, for somebody from Australia, maybe you're interested because you, like Eric, are an Australian and you want to travel and visit these kinds of places. I'm going to introduce you to that space. I'm going to teach you a little bit about the history, the background of the Uinta Mountains, hopefully instill a little bit of love for this space, and talk about, how we travel through here safely and responsibly.
All right, Dave. Well, we appreciate you coming here to the KSL Stream Center to break down this new podcast that has dropped here today through the Cold Channel. Dave, where can everyone find this podcast if they want to listen to this? Again, Cheryl here on Facebook says, the very best person for this case. I will agree with you, Cheryl. Dave is the person to tell this story. He does it beautifully. I've listened to the first 2 episodes, and he will take you on a journey. He will take you on Eric's journey and Marilyn's journey. This is a family from Australia who ends up here in Utah, and he will take you on that journey, and you will feel for this family as they've lived this missing person's case. So, Dave, how do they find this? And we will end this conversation playing that trailer of Uinta Triangle, but give everyone the details here.
Well, thank you for pumping me up, Shara. I hope the story lives up to the praise that you're giving it and expectations. It's something I care deeply about. You can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, you just search Uinta, that's UINTA Triangle. It's right there. It's free to listen. You can also visit our website, uintatriangle.com. We will have articles, photos, videos, all that kind of stuff published there. And I just, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about Eric Robinson's story and the Uinta Mountains. Thanks.
Absolutely, Dave. This is a story of connection. So, folks, go check it out.
Eric said to me, come and look at this. This is magnificent. Let's go walk here. It's a magical place. There was always a walk. That was what he wanted to do. Being out in nature and exploring. We had an understanding if he wanted to go and hike somewhere, he would do that. His mantra was, I'm going to do as many walks as I can for as long as I can carry a backpack.
Walking this path, it's just really narrow.
I don't think I'd ever really heard much of the Highline Trail.
And off to the left.
So him saying, I want to do this trail, it
drops down
10,000 feet for a lot of it. And
sheer looking cliff.
Yeah, it was a pretty cool adventure.
Below it, Dead Horse Lake.
It was steep, it was rocky, it was imposing, but it was also hallowed ground.
How can you not take a photograph of that?
That Highline Trail runs the length of the mountain range.
You can do it by yourself, which was what Eric liked to do.
The last time I saw Eric, I was like, I'll see you in 10 days at the Highline Trailhead.
One night, my phone rings. She said, I don't want to alarm you, but Eric is overdue.
64-year-old Eric Robinson came all the way from Australia to hike the Uintas. Deputies are searching a 60-mile trail spanning about 400,000 acres.
It was literally a needle in a haystack. We've got to solve this problem. We've got to actually figure out, where is he? What's happened here?
Back on the Uinta Highline Trail, following in the footsteps of Eric Robinson.
He was trying to find a safe way off of this cliffy slope.
You wonder what it would sound like in that basin if somebody was calling.
Sketchy, patchy information, and I needed to know. Because a missing person can be missing forever.
Super fun.
It's really easy to get disoriented in the Uintas. And you can see the snow in the pictures.
I woke up with an awful sense of being alone.
So many possibilities. Would he run away?
It's a story of a missing person, but it's also an acknowledgement of a life that was well lived.